Did you ever wish that you had someone guiding you on money matters from the time you drew your first paycheck? I know I did, and there is a new financial playbook to guide you through it. Scott Galloway's The Algebra of Wealth, a simple formula for success, actually gives us a formula to work with, which is easy to adopt but requires building the right muscles from a young age to master it. Joining me now is the author of the book, Scott Galloway. Scott, thanks for speaking to NDTV.
Thanks for having me, Tanama.
Right. So, Scott, I have your book right here with me, and I've gone through it, all the chapters actually, and I want to pick your brain further on it. So, to begin with, please share with our viewers, what is the algebra of wealth and how to apply it in the simplest possible way in our daily lives?
Sure. So thanks again for having me. So it's a basic equation, and that is the first is focus, and that is try and find something that you're really good at. Young people are often told to find their passion. I think oftentimes they mistake a hobby for their passion. My view is they should find their talent, something they're really good at. Maybe could be someday in the top 10% in an industry, and this is the key part, that has a 90+% employment rate. The romance industries, acting, modeling, sports, the arts tend to be very low paying and have high unemployment rates. So if you can find something you're good at and then totally focus on it, go all in, don't have side hustles, such that you can establish currency in the marketplace and start making some money. You have to make some money to become wealthy. And then you apply stoicism, and that is recognize that some things you can control, some things you can't. What is in your control is how much money you spend. Try and develop a savings muscle. Try and spend less than you make, such that you can deploy an army of capital that goes out at night and makes money for you while you're sleeping. The third thing is to recognize and appreciate the value of time and how fast it goes. Our species has a difficult time understanding how fast time will go. And finally, diversification, and that is you don't need to be a hero. You don't need to find an NVIDIA. You don't need to find the needle in the haystack. You can buy the whole haystack. And 10% a year returns, which the NASDAQ and the S&P have done since 2008, may sound boring, but that means every 7 years you're doubling your money. Every 14 years, your money is going up fourfold. So find your talent, focus on it, appreciate how fast time will go, spend less than you make, and try and diversify your investment portfolio.
Right. In fact, you use these terms, focus, stoicism, time, and diversification, as you just elaborated on. Now, which one, according to you, is the bigger challenge in today's world, or what do you think most people struggle with?
I think, well, in your 20s, let's be honest, it's really hard to find something you're really good at that you can make good money at. It takes time. Most people don't find it initially. I don't know if you always wanted to be in broadcast journalism your whole life, but when I was younger, I thought I was going to be an athlete. Then I thought I was going to be a doctor. Then I thought I was going to be an investment banker. And I finally landed in teaching and in analytics. So don't be hard on yourself if it takes you some time as a young person to find your talent and your focus. It's also, quite frankly, very difficult in a capitalist economy to save any money because every day you have very intelligent people with godlike technology convincing you to upgrade from economy to first class, to book a bigger room, that there's 5 people looking at this hotel room, and if you don't book it, you might lose it. So it is very difficult to save money in this era. And then as you get older and you make some money, I would say that the difficult thing to do is to diversify because people are under the impression that if they believe in something and they have conviction, that they should go all in on something. And that's what the popular press tells them. So at every stage of life, there are challenges here. This is not easy, but it's doable.
Mm-hmm. Right. In fact, your book is peppered with a lot of personal experiences that you've drawn upon while writing it. Now, you also mentioned it in your previous answer that it's important to find what you're good at, basically your talent. And you also specify that talent is greater than passion and one should pursue what one is good at rather than what probably pumps our blood more. Now, most people find that very difficult. So in order to actually find out what they're very good at a young age. So if you could tell us, how can a young person determine, spotting their talent before they step into the job scene, how can that be made easier, or what are some of the things that they can practice from a very young age before they actually hit the job market?
Well, the first is to recognize where you're going to need to be to make a living in any industry. If you want to be a football player, you need to be in the top 0.1%. And so if you think you're going to make a living in football, you need to be honest with yourself about whether you are getting signals that you could be in the top 0.1%. The other thing is to workshop a variety of different things. Most people do not start in the career that they end up in. So work hard at something, stick with it, apply yourself, but have an honest conversation after 2 or 3 years around whether or not it really suits you and if you're really good at it. And then also, I think it's very hard to read the label from inside of the bottle. Hard to read the label from inside of the bottle, Tanama. And I would suggest assembling what I call a kitchen cabinet. And that is 3 or 4 people who know you, who you respect, who are smart, and most importantly, will give you honest feedback even when it's painful, and ask them questions. Am I in the right job? Am I doing well? Because sometimes young people get discouraged and think this is hard. I don't like it. It must not be my passion. No, sometimes that's just work, and most people's first jobs are not that enjoyable. So 1, workshop a series of different careers if one isn't getting you anywhere. 2, recognize that some industries you need to have a higher bar for how good you are. And then finally, assemble a kitchen cabinet to give you honest advice along the way.
Right. Now, another thing while I was reading your book which struck me is you've also advocated that knowing when to quit is very important. Another thing that a lot of people struggle with because either they don't find the courage to do so or they feel that they are going to be branded as a failure. So how do you destigmatize that?
Well, it's to recognize that people think success is a line that's straight and upward to the right. It's not. Success for most people is a jagged line or a squiggly line. So 1, again, forgive yourself. Recognize that almost every successful person has endured failure. The only thing I can promise any young person is that throughout their life they will have a series of joyous events and they will also face tragedy. And success is mostly a function of luck, when and where you're born, but it's also a function of your ability to endure failure. I've had companies go bankrupt. I've had a divorce. I've had a lot of personal failure. I've lost people I love. But the key to my success has been my ability to mourn and to move on. So recognize early that a lot of your success and a lot of your failure is not your fault. So when you're doing well, try and have some humility and be grateful, but also when things aren't going well, when you get laid off, when investment goes bad, when a relationship doesn't work out, forgive yourself and recognize that at the end of your life, and surveys show this, that looking back on your life, the thing you will regret the most is not bad things happening to you, but how upset you let yourself be at that bad thing. Nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems.
Okay, so to keep moving on is the mantra. Now, Scott, as we mentioned that your book has a lot of personal experiences, which you have jotted down. And so this is, of course, coming from a certain era, certain age. But when you look at Generation Z, a lot of them have this philosophy that they actually think work-life balance is very important. Now, do you think that's possible, that concept?
Well, it is, but what I would suggest is you have an honest and sober conversation around what is required to achieve your goals. So when I survey my students around where they expect to be economically, say by the age 30 or 35, the majority of them, Tanama, expect to be in the top 1%. And most of the evidence shows that if you expect to be in the top 10%, much less the top 1% in terms of influence and economic reward, that you will pretty much have to do nothing but work for a good 1 or 2 decades. And when people say they want to be in the top 1%, but they also value balance, they're not being honest with themselves. There's nothing wrong with moving to a lower cost neighborhood, adjusting down your cost of living and working to live as opposed to living to work. But if you expect to take home a lot of money and be very economically successful, then the reality is you're going to have to acknowledge that you're going to have to work exceptionally hard. So amongst the most ambitious, I would argue that balance for a good 20 years is a myth, and you need to have a sober conversation around the requisite commitment to achieve your goals.
Also, Scott, when I was going through your book, I felt that it's a gold mine for someone who's just starting out. But do you think your book can also help someone who's mid-career?
I think so, Tanama, because what I hear from a lot of people in their 30s and 40s is the book is focused on youth. And that is, if you save $2,000 or $3,000 a year from the age of 21, even if you don't sell a bestseller, even if you don't produce a movie, even if you don't have an investment like NVIDIA, you'll still be fine. But a lot of people wake up in their 40s and haven't started saving and say, is it too late for me? And the reality is with today's technology, if you're 35, you're probably going to live another 60 years. You're probably going to work another 40 years. Now, you need to be more aggressive in terms of saving, but you also have some advantages. You may have a partner where you can get alignment around financial goals and work together and apply the power of a team. You may be able at some point to realize how much money you need to retire to live on, which is a blessing because you can reverse engineer into how much money you will need to save and start saving that amount. And then as you get into your 30s and 40s, you can think about a lifestyle arbitrage. And that is ask yourself, do you need to live in the highest cost areas in the world? Maybe once the kids are out of the house, could you downshift and move to a much lower cost city? There are a lot of people in the U.S. moving to lower cost domains, including Costa Rica or Mexico. A lot of people moving to Athens in Europe. So there are advantages at any age, but to think that it's too late in your 30s or 40s ignores just how long we are living. It's not too late. You need to apply more discipline. You need to save more, but you can absolutely make it happen.
Right. Scott, that brings me to the last question that I wanted to ask you, and veering off a little away from your book, but it's connected. Have you been to India? Have you traveled to India?
India is the most important, relevant country in the world I haven't been to, but I plan to fix that problem in the next couple of years. I moved to London, and I'm very excited to come to India.
All right. So my question basically was that what can the West learn from India or from the Eastern way, how we handle money? Do you think there's a distinct difference based on what you've read?
Well, what I would say is that my colleagues at NYU, I work with one of the most impressive faculties in graduate education, and there's a disproportionate number of Indians. Your country produces outstanding thought leadership and academics. I would argue that what can we learn from India? India's a young population is powerful, education is powerful, and also democracy is powerful. So it's no accident that people are saying that over the next 20 or 30 years, India will be kind of the key swing vote geopolitically and economically globally. So, all the moons are lining up for India to have a wonderful 2 or 3 decades ahead of it.
Mm-hmm. Right, and we look forward to your trip over here very soon, hopefully. Scott, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you, Tanima.